Hello, and to you and to everybody on streaming. We are happy to welcome so many participants. My name is Anne Parrin, Women for Cyber, in order to give more visibility to women in the cyber field. And here around are the big stakeholders around domain names. We called it Into the Wild because a lot of things are happening around very different aspects, technical, legal, and branding. The domain name implies regulating a regulatory organism, the FIC in France, and with registration numbers. And then on top, there is the ICANN in France, with the international agency in charge of worldwide rules. This is where we stand. There are a lot of stakeholders. Virginie Bruno, she is lawyer. Lexing Bensoussan is in charge of intellectual property and contentious in nominee Drouin from Bercy, Finance Ministry. Nicolas Pavlak is Red Flag Domain Association for trying to order the whole thing. Jérôme Guial from the ATSI, project manager, and Gabriel Le Chapon from NameShield, one of the big registration offices. We are going to discuss around manipulation forms, which are increasing and deploying more and more, and some feedback on experience. First issue is the classical approach, which is to take a domain name that is very well known and to profit of the foisonnement. Historically, there was another technique, but obviously methodology changes, isn't it, Virginie? Thank you. Proliferation. Thank you. So the question is, what is the strategy against the proliferation of domain names? Usually, there were very few extensions, and the strategy was, that is what we told our clients, is to certify as many names as possible. And then the ICANN decided that there would be new extensions. There are around 1,500 extensions, and therefore the strategy is not practicable anymore, materially and physically and financially. Therefore, as lawyers, as institutions, as companies, we need to review the strategy, protection strategy, and we need to try to define a policy, prevention policy, against this infraction by adopting another well-thought-of strategy. First step would be to identify which signs can be identified around the company and the identity of the company in order to kind of see which one needs to be protected at first, and then to protect the extension, the most important extensions, like, for instance, .com, which is very, .fr for France. But sometimes there are sector-wise extensions that need to be taken into account because it's strategic. .tv in media, .io in the informatics sector. This consists in identifying the important signs to be and symbols to be protected and the extensions in order to list the main names we need to register. Clearly, you cannot register everything. However, for the rest, we'll set up surveillance actions by calling in services like NameShield, who will help us to regularly look at new registrations and to act and react against those domain names that might hinder and attack our rights. Hello, the round table is called Into the Wild. So we want to avoid being killed, and protection is one thing. However, the scope is so wide now, it's like the Mexican desert. We need to set up surveillance and be vigilant. This enables then the customer to make the right selection and choices. There's always a risk by not protecting the domain name. If it doesn't belong to you, you need to know why you decided not to do so. And you decided to leave it open. So the surveillance needs to happen, and you need to know. And then you need to ask the right question. Is it going to harm me, or is it enough to monitor enough? This strategy of watching and of surveillance is absolutely crucial to be organized by the company, and it needs to be done by all the stakeholders. And they need to agree around the table. The real risk is not the same as a technical risk or a hacker attack. In any company, there are some prerequisites and different subjects. Nobody knows this as well as Jérôme. Any company has their own protection goals. Yes, thank you, Muriel. That's absolutely right. There are two aspects we need to set up in order to defend our domain names. One is you have to do a risk analysis. You need to put money on the table, and therefore you need to know that what you're going to launch is worthwhile. Therefore, you need to register the domain names, but not all, as it has been said. At the beginning, everybody would be registered. Now you would limit the numeric footprint. So you need to make sure the domain you use is pertinent depending on the target. What is your public? What is your public target? So you need to think afterwards of what squatting could happen. Is it then it makes sense. It makes sense to register as some other names around the main domain name. This hinders the main frauds, and it hinders costs in case you find out these domain names have been taken either because they're very near or because they're taking one of the ideas which is known in your own domain names. Another thing is that once you've done the risk analysis, once you've registered everything, you have, this is the second step, you need to watch. You need to watch your domain name. You think you've done the risk analysis and everything's running smoothly, and one upon a time, somebody finds a leak and attacks. Sometimes it's not very bad. It's just somebody who is just making fun around your name. It's not that bad. It's not attacking the identity. Sometimes there are very bad malware pages. You need to analyze and make surveillance of your domain name, either internally, depending how big your company is and depending on the impact your domain name has locally or worldwide, or to call in service providers. You, for instance, you could help. Yes, we are contributive. We have a list daily of malware domains names. There is surveillance, there are some costs involved. don't forget that today we have solutions at the FIC in France that is not well known. If there is some insertion, you can ask to know who is behind it. Within 48 hours, you have the answer. And if there are wrong information around your company, you can ask to be checked from the FIC, and the FIC blocks the domain name. 7 days is long, but sometimes phishing actions can be 2 to 3 weeks or more. If there are the data are just fake, like the road of the blue sky. But if you see that some have the address some funny addresses, you go to the FIC and they can block the domain name within a week. And this procedure is not very well known, and it is important to use it. Before you do so, you can turn to the registration number, the app sheet, for instance, and other can act and react, and the operator. Speak to the operator, explain the problem, and the day after or so, they might just cut off the site, and this is essential. Because at the end of the day, there are very few rules, isn't it? Everybody can do what he wants. So sometimes when there are discussion, shall we ask from the FIC to do more or others? There are no measures in case the name is being taken from somebody else, like identity theft or so. What is the framework actually, Virginie? The framework is really there is very few framework. On the FIC side, if we look at history, FIC at the beginning adopted a very closed loop system for providing domain names via the right to choose a name. You had to justify why you would choose either through a brand or through a registration number for a company where you could prove that it was your social denomination of the company. The positive side of it was that therefore it was very a trust kind of basis for the .fr. However, all over the world, it was first come, first served. Therefore, we had thousands of .fr names, domain names that were protected, but then millions in the rest of the world. Therefore, it was easier for French to register under a generic domain name or an national foreign extension rather than under FR, which was really not very logical to do and not very interesting. This is the reason why the FIC decided then to drop this this approach, and to come to the just principle of first come, first served. However, this system has a legal framework. In the .fr domain names, it's first come, first served. However, under some conditions of transparency. The legislation doesn't come from the FIC, but there is some legislation work in France stating that a domain name can be refused by registration or afterwards if it goes against the identity, the right, personality right, intellectual property, or so on. This is why I would say we have a legal framework. The trouble is rather it needs to be deployed and put in practice, and it does take some time to set up of efficient measures. The FIC proposes, however, as Nicolas said, measures, verification measures, and different alternative procedures. The Cyrillic procedure, for instance, and within 2 months you can have the radiation of a domain name that does not respect the legislation in France. Yeah, this is it. We have an international framework from the ICANN. It's rather flexible, but the FIC in France for the .fr domain names sets different actions that are not being used enough and are very rapid to defend yourself. So for the finance ministry in Bercy and other official French government sites that defines the constraints that need to be respected. Last October 2022, for instance, impedes that .gov.fr be used. Therefore, there are less fake sites. And then there are other verification procedures that have been launched by the FIC, as Nicolas said. Spontaneously, the FIC is setting up and is radiating different domain names. Even so you don't have a right on a domain name, we are only talking about .fr domain names, and you can launch all this action to protect yourself. It doesn't need to be legally very extensive. It is a rather quick procedure, and it is much quicker than a suspension request to the operator. So usually, if you are really interested, you can set up a strategy to roughly protect your name. You suspend the domain name, you contact the anti-phishing offices, and you ask yourself whether your domain name needs to be protected and whether you need to take legal measures or whether you ask the transfer to yourself, to your old company. So you need to be defensive, you need to be protective, and it does protect against third parties. Nicolas, do you think the FIC should be more constraints? The FIC is working with 85 people only, which is not a lot. It's 2 to 3 million domain names per day. So it is just not possible to come back to a system where you need to prove your name. This is just not feasible anymore. If you delegate this to the registration office, which is OVH, it's 700 to 800 verification daily, even on weekends. The FIC sets up different measures, like, for instance, .gov.fr is been blocked. Unless it is a public service. Then there are mediation procedures for the next coming months, and the FIC is always interesting in getting feedback. They launched a set of public consultation where everybody can answer. And last year, for instance, they only had 10 responses per 10 answers per consultation, which is a pity because it's a good opportunity to make things changing. Oula. In this context, there are diverging interest. One is AFNIC needs to make sure that France becomes more digitalized, and then we have private operators like Erisa or Donuts who are operating only on a commercial perspective in order to have more and more extensions and to for profit. So AFNIC needs to increase the number of domain names with a very noble perspective, because the money, 90% of the benefits of the AFNIC are given out to non-profit organizations. And AFNIC is accompanying SMEs. And then on the other hand, we have Donuts, who is only looking for profits. There's a lack of regulation. Sometimes we are facing very strange situations where private operators will structure programs of protecting PML, TRX, or you are asked even more money to block other new extensions that have been created, and to make sure that you will not be attacked again around your domain name. This is the reason why it was very expensive already, and it's increasing by 100% with very high amounts. So we are really into the while. You decide to build a brand. It costs a lot. Virginie, you know that protecting a brand is quite a budget already. And it's getting worse with the domain names, and it's difficult to work on that. In the registration office, we have a very pragmatic approach, as Jérôme said. The surveillance is really the key. You can have the right technology to take, again, ownership of whatever you want to own, and not to be ransomed without knowing why. Here, if you have the TTPH, you have to prioritize whether it's a very critical brand, and whether and depending whether a satellite domain name is really a threat. It's always difficult once you have a brand to decide whether it's critical or not. Here we can help you around the right risk around brand names. The more your brand is generic, it's complicated. The more the brand is long, the risk is less. There are a lot of rules to help you deciding whether or not you would like to have a wider scope of protection. We need to be pragmatic. We need to be pragmatic. If everybody, all the stakeholders sit around the same table, not only legal, IT, and digital, you have your own prerequisites, and everybody needs to fall into, to come to an agreement. Just a word around identity verification. Is it really too much to ask somebody who wants to open a domain name to bring in its identity? We came to the FIC and we had to show our identity card. I don't think it's really asking too much. Verification is one thing, that's an operational problem, but there are other ways. What do you think? why should identity not be checked right from the beginning? At the FIC, this is a subject around the abuse, the verification in order to make sure whether or not it's a criminal use, and in order to make sure that registration offices are more demanding. I am a registration office, and we always say we are an intermediary between the FIC and the end user. So we don't care, we don't verify. Some stakeholders do, because verifying whether your OVH seems to be complicated. In ChipChick, we don't do verification because we're corporate and we work with brands. We have internal mechanism to make sure everybody is applying the following the rules. However, there's a cursor between, where do we put the cursor between verifying anything or verifying nothing? So the FNIC would like to make sure that all register who do not participate of a minimum regulation and verification. One thought, for instance, would be to ask for sanctions. Some are requesting for it. However, who then is responsible along the chain? All the experts need to understand that it is everybody's business to look for safety. The FNIC wants to begin to sanction some registration numbers that have a high abuse amount, high abuse figures. However, when we talk about identity control, it is just it could be at registration side or before. I am asking myself, we have a Finnish person who wants to have a .fr domain name. It's open to 30 names, to 30 countries. So how do you check a Finnish identity number document? It's really difficult. I'm not sure everybody is ready to wait a week until the identity card is being verified. Then the risk is that a lot will not go to FR but to .te or others because it's quicker. It would be really a pity. As you say, Nicolas, we are playing in an international field. It's not harmonized. There are some standards that are very flexible from the ICANN, and we have a problem, an issue around digital sovereignty. Therefore, we need to have rules and a framework. And on the other hand, we need to remain competitive around .fr in comparison to La Marque or others, or the brand. We do not have a real legal network on the European side in order to harmonize. So we need to set the priority at the right level in order to make sure that the .fr remains attractive and doesn't be sanctioned by a question of cost or identity check. There is an abuse verification system that is done in all registration offices, and the owner of the domain name needs to guarantee that the identity he provides is right. The integrity, it goes as far as a phone number, an email, or a postal address. There are some big companies who were taken aback because they only have 30 days to guarantee the information they provide, and if there is no return, no answer, they risk to freeze the domain. This is very tricky because it means that the site doesn't work anymore. The emails don't, and nothing works anymore. And some companies, because they moved, because the person who is in charge of it did not do the right update of the information on time and had no time, because sometimes the verification were not done at the right time for the reminder. and it is a panic on board because nothing works anymore. So the whole process and this reglementation brings high risks of so everybody should be playing the right role and providing this information at the right time in real time. And we are far away from this situation. And from my opinion, we have to work and to be spreading the good news to our clients. They need to do updates. They need to be on time, and decision-making processes are long. Even so, we have a corporate approach. We don't have 100% right information. So, say it was probably even worse with registers that don't play the right their role that they should.
I would like to come back on the obligation to check the identity that we could require from the registrar. So I would like to add my point of view as a lawyer. It is difficult in terms of implementation, but I would like to remind you that neither the registers nor others are judiciary organs. How can you check the identity of an applicant? How can I register a domain name? It is not linked to my identity. There is no legitimacy to be checked and ask justifications. I have the legal obligation to provide with information, and it is my responsibility to do so. The sanction, if I cannot be joined, I can freeze a domain name, but you cannot ask from FIC or any other association or from a registrar, which is a private company, to check the identity of the applicants. If you compare this to brand law, if you register a brand, the INPI will not check your identity when you fill in your form. And this is it works the same for any intellectual property office. The domain name and the territory of cyber squatters is as it is. It would hamper the freedom of people. Now, I would like to open the discussion to other initiatives and other practices in France and elsewhere. First of all, Lia, merci. You have other ways to act. It's not a new initiative. It's not specific to Bercy. But rather than talking about what can be done in terms of defense and prevention, there's also the communication aspect. The government wants to inform the citizens that to make sure you are on a name on a website, you need to have .gov.fr. Because the volume of cyber squatting around public websites will never end, you know. Figures are now around 200 or 300 false official sites. So it is enormous. It will never end. We cannot attack them all. We cannot have a 100% defensive attitude. So we have to educate citizens on the fact that there are tools, and the information service of the state went even further because they tried and make sure that the ergonomy of the websites be the design system of the state that facilitates the creation of websites for all public stakeholders, taking the risk that this tool be used by cyber squatters as apparently to create apparently official websites. So our vision is to check .gov.fr and the general aspect, the Marianne and the organization of the website, to make sure that you are on a secured official site. Indeed, the state tries and do whatever to secure the .gov.fr website, but companies do the other way around. I hope there are no representatives of the Post, because the Post is an example not to follow. So it ends with .info, and actually it is official. It doesn't look like, but when you multiply such websites, well, it prevents the citizens from recognizing an official site. It's not the only one. McDonald's did the same to disseminate a PDF. So we should harmonize these with a short list of domains. Can you talk to us about what NCSC does? And do you inspire yourselves from it in the framework of new initiatives? Yes, indeed. The idea is to reduce the perimeter of the digital footprint. If you are a well-known brand, you have no interest in changing your address a lot. So if a brand is clearly identified, the more unique, the more the public will know it, and they will not look for another address. So that's something you have to bear in mind if you want to reduce the digital footprint. But there are initiatives that exist within the government to avoid such problems, particularly with AP. We have put a system of cyber squatting to protect domain names related to the ministry. It is only limited to central administration for the moment. And the idea is to limit the possibility to use someone else's website and limit the use of variations around gov.fr. There are many, many possibilities to create false websites. And it's all the more simple that they now have at their disposal this design kit. So usually what happens is to usually how it worked, well, people ask money from you, a fine or whatever. So we set up this cyber quota system on the ministry website with a provider. As Noemi said, and we have 100 warnings a day on some words, which is quite concerning. Why? Well, because the website that was set up, well, should have been thought differently when the domain name was registered. ANSI has a look at what happens elsewhere, abroad. There are initiatives at the European level, DNS for EU, for instance, which helps protecting DNS. We did not talk about it, but it's an important part of the network. It's the underlying technical part that supports the domain name and that redirects towards the right IP address, because it's the objective of a domain name. The idea being to access the content. So DNS for you helps you helps the resilience and helps you filter filtering illegitimate websites, but we can also imagine to enrich the system with information provided by European agencies, for instance. So this initiative is not completely complete. There are other systems that have been set up in England. You mentioned them with NCSC that set up the protective DNS, and one of the main most efficient measure would be to have a DNS for the state, meaning that any user would go through this DNS, which would be qualified, for which the DNS would say, DNSE would say this DNS is correct or not, or it is a trusted address or not. It works very well. The British administration works this way, and they managed to reduce the number of cyber squatting, which requires a lot of human resources and money. So the British are well in advance. We try and copy this model, which is quite pragmatic. There are other situations and systems that are set up. We talked about the anti-fraud system. The idea is to protect the citizen, preventing him from going to malicious websites. When a citizen accesses a malicious website, they will have a pop-up. I don't know how concretely it will be. It will happen, but they will have an alert telling them you should not go to this website. It is not sure, secure, etc. So, and there will be also a grade that will be given to this or that website. So it's a project that will be launched before the Rugby World Cup as a test. It will not be totally produced by September. We will probably be ready by next year. Last but not least, NCNN does things. We do not talk about it, but we are working a lot. We support an inter-ministries system because it's a cable system between the different administrations. And for a month, we observed attacks which help us block these malevolent websites. People who use all the know-how of ANSI to have the list of malevolent websites to block, to avoid. So we try and copy the British, but we hope to go even further. The good news is that only 3 or 4 years ago, we were considered vulnerable, not only externally with the DNS response with their own names. For 3 years now, people are now increasingly aware, and the cyber score is an example of it, because it includes a certain number of assessment criteria, integrating elements that are related to domain names. It's quite hazy for the moment because there is the law, the decree, and all the technicalities related to it. So there is an open please provide us with ideas to feed the rating of the cyber score with different items. It's open to everyone, and it's up to the 15th of April. So we could have a round table on it. So mastering A domain name is really important, but has many aspects. But nevertheless, it will create a ranking between, I think, from F to A plus. If you have a good domain name, you will be between C and A plus. So it will have an impact. So this ranking is made of 40 items. So there are things to be done on this public contribution call. You opened a debate on the DNS, and I hope we haven't lost half of the people in the room. But there are many attacks with the domain names, and the Wild West is not is there. It exists, and ANSSI, you have to know it, published a guide of best practices with recommendations, and it's not something you should buy. We like to be pragmatic, sorry, how to technically or with your administration manage correctly your cyber aspects. You have to talk about the names in companies. Today, most often it is managed in silos. Sometimes it's a secretary in the purchase section, i.e. someone who's very far from the possible consequences. And if there is one message I would like to convey, it is a topic opening to many others in the companies, and which has an important impact. It is important to have ANSSI explaining what they do, and that's what we tried and do today. Thank you, Muriel, for the advertising and the publicity you made for ANSSI. Okay, we have a guide here. Well, it dates back from 2017. It is still updated because the same mistakes are still true today, but it should be updated with what you said, particularly the issue of governance. From a technical point of view, this ANSSI guide provides you with best practices. I think there are 20 or 22 of them. Among the most important ones, there is the register to freeze a domain name. If someone wants to take your domain name through the registration office, you can avoid it thanks to a double authentication between the registrar and the person who registered the domain name. It's a way to safeguard your domain name. The registration office is vulnerable, so if you can have a double identification, well, you can have you should check if the registration office offers this double identification check. Unfortunately, it's not the case everywhere. If your name is compromised, you nevertheless have to do it. What is important is security. As ANSSI, we like to speak about security and repeat it very often, but there are not all the offices have the DNSSEC protocol, but we would like everyone to be able to implement it. It's quite difficult, but it's very useful to avoid operations such as cache poisoning, which are really harmful. I wanted to remind you of these. maybe I would like one recommendation, which is not a technical one, to check the exploration of domain names. People usually forget to say, okay, my domain name has expired, and the day after someone may take it, and it may have big consequences in it. So you have to organize an automatic renewal of your domain names and avoid paying with, you have to avoid paying with your credit card. You talked about the ELOC register. There aren't many of these. 2 years ago, only 2% of the registration offices used it. And I would like to add one recommendation. Some domains where the DNS is abundant. What does that mean? There are many under domains. Some of them are, the problem is that if someone recreates a website, it's under a sub-domain of your domain. So you should clean your DNS is part of what you should do. I think that we said what we wanted to say. We still have a few minutes left. Do you have questions? Are there questions in the room?
Bonjour, merci pour la présentation, c'était hyper intéressant.
Thank you for your presentation. Very interesting indeed. Could you please re-explain the last point? I did not understand how an attacker can build a site on the basis of an under DNS. If your attacker manages to create a domain name, a subdomain on this server, it will head towards your website. You may have more information on the internet. It's not very simple, but it exists. In any case, it is important to clear your area because this risk exists. So we talk about mutualized websites or IPs with Cloudflare, for instance. Thank you for your presentation. Really interesting indeed. As far as the registration offices are concerned, you said that some of them did not help with the localization. They are not particularly in France. Can you improve that aspect? Indeed, the French registration office, unfortunately, the market is very concentrated. Some are FIC accredited, 400, sorry. But they are not only accredited for one extension. So in France, there aren't many who sell domain names. In less picky countries, you can find them. But in France today, there are registering offices do not want, it's not that they want to facilitate hacking. And if systematically we tell them that their measures are not correct, anyway, the fact that we do not induce to contribute to cyber criminality at world level. It's sometimes the resources that are lacking, and it means that you have to be more cautious. Yes. Are you faced with this issue of proof registers, or you don't have it in France? Registrars that that do not answer to all the requests of the law enforcement, etc. I like to learn new things. You taught me something here. Registrars sometimes do not answer what we ask from them. Yes, of course, you can do it, but sometimes you can do something with the host, but then you do not reach the original country. Other providers do some tech dumps. There are lists of structures who do not help us, both with hosts or registrars. I'm not doing any name and shame here, but I think it begins with a C and ends with an R. There are a lot of requests because they say they're just intermediates and they do not want to deal with such problems. To complete what Muriel said, I do not know the bulletproof registers, but it's a good thing to know. Okay, we have to check on this. Our issue against the fight against malevolent websites within the interministerial websites. It's the PH. They are very well known, and it's clearly part of people we try to eliminate in terms of DNS. Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for your presentation. I heard you talked about checking the name of the person who registers a new name domain. When you see the number of IDs that are available on the internet, I have a doubt there. And double identification, you can very easily get a phone number on the internet. I hear that you need a week to cut a domain name. Today, the Pharos domain where you can lay a claim when something has been stolen. Nowadays, data go around the world in 3 minutes, that you need 1 week to stop a domain name. Couldn't you do something when someone lays a claim to react quicker?
With regard to MFR, that's a beginning. We will always try to work around. If you have a provider, you have a level of security, then we can add some filter. This belongs to the INCYBER recommendations. And then it's the SSO. This is the last step. You can identify a provider that can be working on it, and this is the top level. If you have MFR filter, Regitilog, and you're on the SSO, then you are well protected. Some actors, some stakeholders have nothing. So let's begin with the MFR. This is the first decision. It's common sense to make sure you begin. You can not ask to be at the top of the hill if you haven't begun to climb. So the 7 days we're talking about, I guess it is the procedure from the FIC. It's 7 days because the owner needs to have time to respond. And sometimes the owner really exists. There is only a mistake in the address or the phone number. The FIC cannot just block a domain name if there is no problem behind it. So we need to leave some time left. the domain name is just blocked and not destroyed. It take another year. So contacting the host is something, but the person can create another site or a site with different hosts. So it doesn't make any sense. Faro says once a week. I don't have a feedback even within an hour. So I use them once a week, but the host reacts very quickly. What can be identified is the different types of action that can be taken, and people don't know these different channels for flagging problem. We can speak about the different existing procedures where the procedure takes 2 months, which seems to be really completely stupid. However, at the end, there is retrocession to the requester. This is a set of different procedures. Some will be quicker and slower. The end idea is to stop the abuse, and then it depends on how bad the attempt is. Faro's in the pedophile line is not the same. It really depends what we're talking about, how critical the character is, and the specific the leakage is. Right, Muriel, I think you're right. There's a difference between the abuse, the site, and the constraints and the problem arising. Therefore, we need to talk with among ourselves and because you need to make sure you act on different levels, and it's only the conjunction of both that will help at the end. Hello, and thank you for this conference. I have a very simple question to the FIC, the user. Most of the companies have a lot of anti-spam and phishing solutions. We receive SMS that content with the content and with links. Did you speak to the operators, historic operators like SFR, Orange? Because if we can do it in our companies, why can't they do so? There is a representative of the FIC in the room. Maybe he can answer this point. Hello, Benoit Po of FIC. I will try to answer as, even though it's not my business. For the security emails, there's a first level of response that is technical. It's SPF taking the mark. That can be different technique on emailing server. There are a host provider who deploy those mechanisms, and this hinders the reception of these fraudulent emails and identifies the sender. We made a paper on an article on this, and the problem is that very few providers for the public provide this service. So we still have some way to go with regard to the French providers and hosts. Problem is regarding the public as a whole. When it comes to B2B, it's up and running, and it should be done also regarding the customer. Less than 6% of the sites are deployed in DMARC, and the performance not that good. So depending on what you choose, you can be sent as a spam, but without spoofing. Or you accept everything and then you can be victim of a theft. So there is a wide range. It's 3 different protection levels. SPF is the basic of the basic of the basic, really. It's the easiest to put in place. So if some could check whether they have the SPF. This is an emergency to put in place. But only less of 7% of the time, this is really a huge problem. This highlights that minus 5% of the sites that was 2021. I think now we're up to 7%. It shows that in the domain names we have a lot of steps to go to improve, and it is still being seen as like something like an insurance. You never know, it could help. No, guys, that's reality. You need to take an insurance, even so there is no fire outbreak. It's the same approach, and as it is not mandatory, people don't do it. And people sit and wait. Registry log, SPF, TKM, this is what you need to check right now. Sorry, I can't hear the question. I can't translate. In a company, we have the firewall that will be blocking. When I have a SFR phone, why is this phone not blocking? The site that is cloned, that is typically looks like ours, but it's SPFXZ. This is my question. This is one of the objectives of the filter, so that the public too can be protected, like any company. The idea is to inform the public and to hinder him to receive these messages. That's the idea. As I said, there are other things like the protective DNS, like the Brits. It hinders a lot of, it reduces this risk. Sorry, I can't hear. The interpreter cannot hear the question. We live in a country that is democratic. We have a problem of competition. There are the research engines. We need to discuss with him and negotiate and convince them. And as it works on state level, it's a good sign. It's only a beginning. The Brits did it, but as far as I know, the Brits are not in Europe anymore. It's half a Brexit, and we are not able to get organized among the member states. So it's really digital diplomacy, and the impact cannot be decided in a unilateral way. We're working on it. As I said, on European level, there are initiatives. We are late. I think on European level, we are late. English are alone. Need to watch what they do. On European level, it's moving slowly because it's public administration, but you can't say we don't do anything. We need some more time. You spoke about a CyberScore certificate. Is it a French approach, or is it something that is been done with along with other European countries? As far as I know, it's only French. But I can't tell you more. I've just heard about it. It will be on the navigator, yes, at the end. It should be sites for 25 million visitors, then down to 15 million visitors a month. It is really the top of the visited sites. It will concern Le Bon Coin, Pure Player, huge Pure Player. It raises some questions because At the beginning, it was only unique visitors, but is it DNS request or here are different elements to choose. Here we are talking about traffic of visitors, could be the exchange of mail exchanges. There are a lot of hooks. It is only really the beginning. It's a French approach, but there is a will to launch a global approach notation of heavy traffic sites. And France is an example here because it is an interesting initiative. And if we can show it is functional, this is an interesting approach. It can be duplicated very easily to other. There is a European delegation at the FIC, and this is one of the subjects we discussed with them. Non, mais c'est pas possible.
Bonjour. Alors moi j'ai une question concernant le dépôt des noms de domaine. Est-ce que si moi je dépose un nom de domaine qui est manifestement malveillant et que voilà, enfin moi je travaille chez Carrefour, si je mets concours-carrefour avec plein de fautes d'orthographe et que dans le nom que je déclare c'est ABCD, est-ce qu'à un moment donné, malgré tout, la requête va quand même aller jusqu'au bout, voilà, ou alors justement il y a des garde-fous qui vont couper
Ça dépend déjà si vous le déposez en .fr ou dans une autre extension.
On va dire en .fr par exemple.
Alors, en .fr, il y a peut-être plus de probabilité que la FNIC réagisse spontanément, mais il n'y a pas de règle. Il y a pas la charte de nommage. Vous vous engagez à être éligible et à la respecter en faisant cette déclaration erronée finalement. Et c'est ce que Virginie disait tout à l'heure. Vous pourriez tout à fait faire un dépôt de marque de la même manière. Si quelqu'un se manifeste, évidemment, ça ne va pas aboutir, mais effectivement, on voit aussi que la FNIC essaye de se mobiliser pour détecter au maximum ce qui est manifestement et s'autosaisir de ce qui est vraiment évident. Mais c'est difficile de...
However, it is difficult to identify them.
Le domaine, c'est une chose, mais parfois, il faut voir le contenu en fait pour déterminer le caractère en fait malveillant.
Sometimes it's difficult to determine the malevolent aspects. We see domain names, we think it is a bad one, but when you see the content, it is not. Like an example, a couple of months ago, I saw a .fr. It's "Mommy is hot." Wow, this is YouPorn. Not at all. It was a bakery. So the name seemed to be really strange. And I had to check to make sure it's all right. So sometimes you need to wait for the content to choose and to be proactive to make sure that it is malevolent. It's not always easy to have this information.
I understand what you say. In that case, it was extremely obvious. It was such a strange name. You can see that it's to fraud people. Let's be pragmatical. Benoit will agree with me. There is a will and there is a difference between the will and the reality. It's that it's not going to work. In practice, FNIC shows a number of terms that should be examined. In that list, you have different categories of terms for which you will be asked to justify your legitimacy to ask the registration of the name. You will have those who will, everything which is related to racial hatred or crime, other terms such as regulated jobs, or terms that are religious. But you have to know that this list is quite limited. And you can just add another term to the one which is examined. You will probably be accepted. we'll have to interrupt the conference, but you can stay. We are still here if you have personal questions you want to ask us. Thank you very much for your attention.